Hey guys, Rob here with another tutorial video. This time we're going to be looking at routing, Chapter A rules, quite in depth, hopefully. And one of the things I've realized, pointed out to me, is that I'm a total mess when it comes to routing. Normally I pick wrong locations, ineligible routes, etc. So this is going to be much for me as it is for you guys. And let's get into it. Now, before we get too far, one is this article by Bill Kohler. It's available from aslplayers.net. That's Neil Ulan's ASL Academy site. And go there, get this route flowchart. It's quite lengthy, 6 pages, and with some notes at the bottom explaining in greater detail some of the bullet points that you'll find here in the charts. So I'm going to be using this. I'm also going to be referencing at the end of the video the comprehensive route examples that's available in the rulebook. So we're going to go through every case, and that should hopefully help cement in the routing rules. All right, let's get to it. All right, so looking at the advanced sequence of play, the ASOP, remember that all attacker actions happen first, then followed by the defender. So there's 4 steps, including voluntary break, which again is done per attacker, per defender. So the attacker does all his voluntary breaks. He places the emmblem on those ones that he wants to move that are eligible. We do disrupted unit actions, and then we finally conduct the route phase proper. So just remember that all 4 steps are done prior to the defender. That includes voluntarily break, and this is from what Perry says Q&A as well. So yes, don't forget that. All right, so let's start off with voluntary break. So let's first step in the ASOP. Any unit that's within LOS and normal range of an armed, unbroken, known enemy ground, or if you're adjacent in that location, you may voluntarily break even if you're pinned at the start of the route phase. Should you want to voluntarily break, you must ensure that you are not going to be susceptible to immediate reduction or even elimination. If either of those two apply, then you cannot voluntarily break. There's no freebies, as it were. Finally, if you're in a blaze location and not in melee or pinned, a unit may voluntarily break. If you're either or, you're going to be destroyed or eliminated at the end of the turn because of the blaze. When it comes to desperation morale status, if you're not already under a DM, you can only place it in 2 cases, and that is if you're in a blaze or if you're in a water obstacle. All right, so the next thing after voluntary break is you check any of your disrupted units that meet certain conditions to see if they surrender. Now, a disrupted unit will always surrender to an adjacent known enemy unit, barring no quarter being in effect. That no quarter, if it's declared, is on a per side basis. So if your opponent declares it, you're not obligated to do so yourself, vice versa. Now, typically, if you're on the attack, you usually want prisoners because you can avoid the negation of mopping up. So if it comes to claiming territory, you want to definitely have mopping up. So you're going to have to take prisoners. And you may, if interrogation's in play, you may want to use them for information as well. On the defense, however, you're really probably going to collect prisoners unless they're worth the extra VP. Typically, you're just interested in killing the enemy as quickly as possible. Now, disrupted units do not route normally. Exception, of course, is at nighttime. Anybody can do a low crawl. And again, with no quarter in effect, they will always low crawl away. That's just about the only case for a disrupted unit to move. As well, some units versus certain opponents will never surrender. SS versus Russians, etc. There's a couple of other cases when surrender is possible. If you're adjacent or in the same location as a good order infantry cavalry, and you're encircled, or possibly a heated battle result if you roll 11 or 12, I believe, or higher, that's going to be surrender as well. Or if you're unable to route without facing interdiction without using low crawl. If your only way of getting out of a hex is to use low crawl and you're adjacent to an enemy, you're going to be surrendering instead. When it comes to route direction, you must identify for each unit its route destination. It's got to be a building or a woods location. Even if it's overstacked, that is going to be the fewest movement factors away from your current location. You have to take into account the overstacking cost. I made this mistake when I did a recent solitaire ASL example. I just kept moving my guys in. I had enough move to do it, but legally they should have moved in other locations besides overstacking. Remember that you can never route towards an armed known enemy unit, and leaders without support weapons are still considered armed for this purpose. Um, you cannot decrease that distance in any way, even if they later are out of LOS. So you're on top of a hill, you move behind the hill, and now you no longer can see that unit. You think you can get a freebie and move closer. No, you cannot. You cannot go closer to the armed enemy unit. You still know it's there, so you must abide by that restriction. You cannot move adjacent to an armed known enemy unit unless you're leaving a hex with a known enemy unit. Again, if you are adjacent to even a broken unit, you cannot move adjacent to it. It's still considered armed. As we said, you must route to the nearest movement factors, pre-designated woods or building, barring those no-go areas like FFEs, minefields, water obstacles. Obviously, you can go around those. And routing unit drops all equipment greater than the IPC allows. So typically it's a 3, single man counters, you only have a 1. You only have 6 movement factors as well when you're broken, which can never be increased. And you're not allowed to use bypass. And wounded single man counters will still be limited to 3 movement factors in the route phase. Finally, you may only end the route phase in LOS in range of a known enemy unit, while in open ground if low crawl is used and is not adjacent to the known enemy unit, otherwise you'd be eliminated for failure to route. So remember, for open ground purposes, if you can conceivably get a -1 moving in open for this purpose, then it would constitute open ground. Anytime you move in open ground without using low crawl, you have a potential for interdiction. If they could apply a -1 moving in open against you, then you would suffer a interdiction attempt, which is basically a morale check. You must be within normal range of a non-melee known enemy unit or its support weapon. And any kind of positive die roll would essentially prevent interdiction. Again, you're not using a -1 moving and open, you just must have the ability for a final -1 moving and open. All right, let's briefly talk about interdiction. Now, interdiction is always going to be possible if there would be a hypothetical -1 moving and open applied against you. So anytime you're moving through grain, orchards, for example, that eliminates FFMO. So therefore, you're allowed to run through that without fear of interdiction. However, if you're typically in an open ground hex and you do not use low crawl and you're in the LOS normal range of a non-melee known enemy unit or its support weapon, you will have to roll for an interdiction. Any kind of positive die roll modifier that might be applied would prevent any interdiction. So again, if you have to fire through rain, if you're buttoned up, CX, for example, a single man counter manning a support weapon, all those cases would, while they're considered armed, would not constitute being able to do an interdiction attack against you. You're only allowed to do 1 interdiction per hex per moving unit. So even though you might have multiple units that can shoot, you only roll once for each hex. The interdiction itself is essentially a normal morale check. When you fail it, your casualty reduced, as well as eliminating any leader that's routing with you. Should you roll equal to your morale, you become pinned in place and can no longer continue on your route. If you were to roll original 12, then you're going to be eliminated. That's the fate rule. Any broken unit that rolls 12 for morale check will be eliminated. And finally, heated battle is always a possibility if you roll an original 2. So in some weird situation, you could have your broken unit rally and become berserk and unpinned. Finally, let's look at leadership. Now, a non-berserk, non-pinned leader may join any routing unit you stack with. However, he does share the vulnerability re-interdiction, like we just said. He can use his leadership modifier to modify the morale check required by interdiction. He's not considered broken, although he is moving with the units, and he cannot increase the broken unit's movement factors at all. Again, your maximum move is going to be 6, and if you're a wounded hero, then you're going to be a 3. And because broken units can only carry their IPC, they would not be able to carry a wounded officer. So you cannot also improve a broken unit's IPC. So just because you're tagging along does not mean they can suddenly carry the 4 portage point machine gun. All right, so this is basically the, as I said, the comprehensive road example in the rule book, and we're just going to go through everything in sequence. So again, follow along with the example. It starts on A27. and it's going to be the Russian turn. So therefore, the Russian is the attacker, all caps. So we must do all the attacker actions first. All right, so we're looking at the situation here. We have to find units that we want to voluntarily break. So we're going to start with this guy here. Now he's going to be the only one that does this, so we don't have to worry about the rest. So the first thing we do is we voluntarily break him. That gets rid of the pin. Now, according to the ASOP, we must look at any disrupted units, of which we only have the one, and we have to decide whether or not they surrender. In this case, because we are adjacent to a 467, that's good order and armed, we must surrender to him. So those go there, and we give our 467 a prisoner counter. If I knew where it was, there it is. All right, now we can carry on with the rest of our route. A reminder too that should this unit, again, this is the Russian turn, assume the Russians are on the defense. Should the German, for whatever reason, decide no quarter to reject the surrender, no quarter will be in effect. Again, only for the German side, the Russians are perfectly able to select prisoners. If no quarter was in effect, then this unit would actually be moving away from the 467. If it chose P1, it would be eliminated because you can only move one hex, and you've just ended up adjacent to a friendly an enemy unit. So if for some stupid reason he went into the woods, then he would be eliminated. So he would be able to move to P2 if no quarter was in effect, because he cannot see these units up on top of the hill because of the blind hex. However, no quarter is not in effect, so they surrender. We have a squad here with a heavy machine gun and a leader and a hero. Now, if this was me, I would not move. I would just stay in place because it's a very good chance of rallying potentially in the next turn. However, I want to get out of the line of fire in this case, so we're going to go down to the ground floor. Now, before I move, I have to pick valid destinations. I can ignore the building I'm in, and I could pick M1 as a possible destination. I do not know this unit exists yet, so therefore I can't exclude N1 or even N0. I cannot move to L1 because I would move in closer to this broken unit. And of course, L2 and M3 are open and no good. So I essentially can move to M1, or I can move somewhere in this building. So I'm just going to move down to the ground floor. And immediately, because they must drop the 5 portage point weapon, we can do a recovery attempt to see if the hero can pick it up, which he does. So we have a hero, and the 9-1's going to stay with him to help him man the heavy machine gun. Now, because we have 2 people manning the machine gun, it's able to do its normal armed interdiction. So then we'll move around here to J4. Again, we have options. One, I don't have to route because I'm in a non-open ground hex. I have to be careful where I choose. I can see these units on top of the hill. However, if I want to go to L4, for example, I could go through K5 because this unit is CX, therefore cannot interdict. And I do not see it, most importantly, so I'm able to move up to it. If I move into this location, I'm also have height advantage. Would this thing have been positioned such to shoot, I would have height advantage of +1, which would not allow for interdiction. And again, because he's a leader, yes, he's pinned. However, he's not armed with a support weapon. He cannot actually shoot. He's considered armed for direction purposes, but he does not actually interdict. So I'm perfectly safe to go to L4 by going through K5. From here, I have a choice to make. Again, I do not see this unit or any of these units down here, even when I was up on K5 because of that plateau effect. I could continue on to M5, or I'm going to, in this case, move upstairs. Why? We'll see when it's time for the Germans to start routing. Reminder too that if we back up for a second, if, for example's sake, say that they were interdicted, remember the leader would share the fate of his unit. So this would be a morale check. Just as just an example, in this case we failed, so this would be reduced to a half squad and the leader would be eliminated automatically. So just remember that. You got to be careful when you're moving your leaders, especially when there's possible interdiction, but sometimes situations are what they are and you're forced to do it. All right, so our next example is the broken squad in L8. So here we have a broken unit. It's not in melee, it's only close combat. and we have a 467 adjacent. So we must move because we're in a hex with a known enemy unit. We have one option available, and that's M7. We have a leader down here, so we cannot go anywhere further. Of course, we've got a 467, which precludes M8 and L9, so our only objective is going to be the house at M7. Unfortunately, the only way to get there is to go uphill. Now, the reason why that will be unfortunate is because given the line of fire of this 467, he would not pay the height advantage penalty because he's firing uphill. It has to do with the way the line of fire comes in. If this 467 was this way, then the unit would get the height advantage bonus, therefore not interdiction. But because he's in this location, the fire comes up through the rear of the unit. This would be considered interdiction, which means you cannot route, and so you're going to surrender. We'll put you over there as well. And we'll give our 467 its first prisoner. Next, we have a unit in M5. This here unit, because it's in a building, even though it's in line of sight of enemy, it will not be able to route because it does not meet the qualifications to put a desperation on there. So there's no DM for you, which means you're stuck in place. Conversely, with the N3, because it's in the open and it's in within line of sight of this 467, it must route. So automatically we can put a DM on it. Unfortunately for us, our options are 0 because we cannot go into O4. That brings us closer to these units which have line of sight. We cannot go into M4 or N4 because of the half track, which again is facing this way. So it's covered our covers L3, M4, and N4. And of course, we cannot go back because of those same reasons. So we can see this unit here. We cannot go left. We cannot go right, up, or down. We're basically going to be eliminated for failure to route. When it comes to this squad here in O5, again, it is in a wood or stone building, so it does not need to route, nor could it, because it's adjacent to another broken enemy unit. So you cannot move adjacent, assuming this unit's here. We're not in line of sight. I think they are. You would not be able to move to P4 in any case. But if this unit was not here, you would still not be allowed to move to P4 because you're moving adjacent to a known enemy unit. Again, you must move away from that if you move. You cannot move left because, again, the half track, and therefore you cannot move any closer to that. So your closest destination for you would only be P4, and it's ineligible because of this unit here. So you're not going to do anything, you're just going to stay where you are. Now we go here to R6, so we're going to have to surrender him as well, because remember he's encircled. Should he be encircled and broken, adjacent to a known enemy unit, then you will surrender. So once more, we can put these guys in the surrender pile. And we give another 467 its prisoner as well. Now, it did have valid paths outwards, but again, because it was encircled in this location, it was forced to surrender. Once more, the Germans are not going to refuse surrender because they're on the attack, and they don't want to invoke no quarters, so they're going to be burdened with a fair number of prisoners. Let's go back to our half squad down here that we broke. So again, we have to pick a destination. For us, we have 3. We can go N8, N9, or O10. Thinking ahead, you already know your options. You're going to pick N8 because we're eventually we want to end up at M7. So if you can pre-plan your routes, you have that kind of view that the unit itself does not. This unit does not know this unit is here, but you, the player, do, so you could plan accordingly. All right, so you're going to move to N8 as your destination. You're going to go through O9. Again, O8 or O9, it doesn't matter. It's the same move to get into N8. However, it does mean that we will not be able to get shot by the turret of the tank. So we spend 3 movement points to go inside the woods. And then we realize, okay, we're suddenly adjacent to a German. Now we have to keep moving. What are my options? We cannot go back because we're moving closer to an enemy that we knew. And we have a house here 2 hexes away. Convenient. So we're going to go 4, then 5, 6 into that hex. And then lastly, we have this schmozzle up here. So we have a couple things going on. Now, the first thing we're going to do is, and you have to think about sequence of events. Sometimes it's very important the certain order that you do things. So this first unit here, we have to move because we have a berserk unit. We cannot be adjacent to a location, an enemy. Now, we can ignore our building, or we can go up to the first level. Remember, row houses are treated as separate buildings for this purpose. So R3 is a different building than S3. So I can ignore S3 and I can move to R3 if I so chose. I could move to T3 as well, except remember that for the example, the blue lines are going to indicate the out of bounds areas. In other words, T3 is not in play. So we only really have one choice. We can go to R3. Now it's a row house, which means we must exit it for 1 and then enter the row house for 3. Now, when we exit the outside of the row house, we will not be able to be interdicted because the grain blocks the shot from the 467. Or I should say not blocks it, but it negates moving it open, and therefore the 467 would not be able to interdict us when we're moving outside the hex. Alternatively, if I'm in this location again, I could choose to ignore R3 because it's the same distance away as I am, or equidistant. So I could always choose to ignore R3 completely and maybe even make it over to P2 or even P4. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pay 3 movement points to move to R3. Again, I cannot be interdicted by this unit. And then I want to say make it to P2. I have 2 choices. I can go into this hex, which I would have to suffer interdiction, or in order to make it to P2, or I could move into the shell holes, and then that way I won't be shot at for a total of 5 move. So I won't have enough to actually go into P2. So once again, if I'm in S3 and I declare P2 as my target destination, I first come into R3 at the cost of 3 move, and then I go into the shell hole for 2. Again, if I want to go all the way into P2, I will not be able to be in the shell hole, which means I'd have to take a morale check to avoid interdiction. And when you start getting with low morale troops like Italians and French, where your broken morale is typically lower, 6, etc., you probably want to hedge your bets on that. If we look at our case here again, and say I mistakenly chose P4 as my example, so once more, we're going to spend 3 move to go into R3. This unit here is not known. However, the minute I pay this, while it cannot be interdicted, because again, the hedge eliminates moving and open, I now can see this unit and I will be unable to move, which would negate, I would be at 4 move, which means I would not be able to go any closer. I could go into P3 at a cost of 2. So remember to plan your routes accordingly. Again, based on your knowledge. Yes, this unit is not seen by this unit, but you know it's there as a player. Choose wisely. So we're going to go to P2, like we said, pay 3, and then 4, 5 to stop in the shell hole. Now we have a broken unit that's here in the foxhole. Again, we must move because we're adjacent. My route options for this are very limited. First of all, I can see this unit up here on top of the hill. It's a leader. He doesn't have a support weapon, but he's still considered armed and known good or enemy unit. So therefore, I cannot route any way in this direction. My only course of action is to go to R3. Now that would cost me 3 move, because when you, in this particular case, it's one of those weird rules of foxholes, that if you're going into it, you can be shot at before you actually enter the foxhole. If you're leaving it, you cannot, because you're paying the cost of the hex you enter. So 1 for the shell hole to get, or foxhole to get out, and 2 into the building for a total of 3 movement points. And therefore, I will not be interdicted in the open foxhole. Conversely, if I were to move in, then there's a chance it could be interdicted. Again, depending on how many points you pay to go into the foxhole. Now, I have a choice here again. I can stay on the ground level, or I can go up 1. And then lastly, for the Russians, we have a broken unit here that's in close combat. This one only has 1 option. We can't move to S1 because we're adjacent. We can't move to S3 and stay on the ground floor because we'd be adjacent. And because we now have eyes on this unit here, so we pay 2 to go into that location. We now have eyes on the German in this location across from the grain. We cannot move any closer. So our only recourse is to go upstairs because we cannot, again, end up adjacent to an enemy unit. So we move upstairs. Just a final note, again, if no quarter was in effect, many of these cases would not happen. It would be elimination rather than capture, or more than likely the unit would be able to use low crawl to get away. So if we look at our case here, remember we were DM'd. If no quarter was in effect, we could move away. So just remember that. If no quarter is in effect, a lot of these rules don't necessarily, or a lot of these moves that were made don't necessarily apply. All right, so now it's going to be the German half of the route phase. So the first thing the German has to do is decide, does he want to break anybody? This has a 10-2, which he has 3 broken units. He may want to decide to break them, but then he also has to worry about interdiction and getting away. So in this particular example, the Germans do not have any voluntary breaks. So first thing we look at is for disrupt units, which we don't have any for the Germans. So then we start moving the units. So this unit here must route because it is adjacent to the 447. However, it cannot come to J2 because now that we have a unit up here on the first level, this is where I told you we would find out during the German route, we've been moving towards that unit and we cannot do that. So therefore, because we moved a broken unit up into the first level, we've thereby forced this unit to surrender. So it drops its LMG and it joins the prisoner of war camp. Now, again, this is a good trick to remember. Russians typically do not deploy. They cannot deploy, in fact. However, when it comes to prisoners, you are allowed to immediately deploy into 2 half squads, and therefore 1 half squad could act as guards while your other one's free to do whatever you want to do. So just remember that with nationalities that cannot deploy, that if you have prisoners, you kind of bend that rule. Now looking at this German passenger in the half track, so he does not have to route because he's not in open ground. If he were to route, his only option would be to stay under the vehicle because, again, he cannot move to J2 because of this unit, and he cannot move to J4 because of this unit. He'd have to risk interdiction and such. So his only action, and he may as well take it, is to stay hunkered down inside the half track. At least he's not in open ground. Next up, we have these units here. So we've got 2.5 squads, again, with a pin 10-2. Now, if this unit here had not been able to pick up the HMG, nobody would have eyes on this top that would be able to stop us. But because we have a hero and a leader manning a heavy weapon, they will be able to interdict us in K7 or J7. So we must pick a destination for our Germans here, and there's really only 2, and that's either L8 or M9, excuse me, L9 or M9, because we cannot be any closer to this unit. When we start to move, we have to be aware of where this unit is, because the minute we see him, we will not be able to move any closer. So we're going to start with the first guy here. We're going to head towards M9. So the first guy decides he doesn't care about that. He's got a 7 morale. He thinks he can make it. So we go this far. We take a morale check. All right, we're fine. So then we can continue on our way. We go 2 to K8, 3. Now we see this unit. We cannot be interdicted because the 447 has to deal with this armor, which gives us a +1. So it negates moving in open, which means he cannot fire. So we've got for a total of 5 movement points. All right, the second guy, again, we can do interdiction here. Again, we got a 5, so we're fine. So we can continue on our way. If, say, he had rolled a 7, then he would actually be pinned in place and he would be forced to stop his route phase there. Now, if he was adjacent to an enemy when this happened, of course, he would be eliminated for failure to route. So we have a broken, still DM'd unit. Now this guy's here. He's only got a 4 morale. That's probably going to fail. So he's just going to use low crawl to move 1 hex. Once more, if the 10-2 had wanted to route, he would have had to declare it prior to anything else for the German side. So just remember that again. Sequence is very important. Also remember to, something that I'm always guilty of is I tend to move in stacks, which is really bad habit. You're going to pay the price if you keep doing that. So, and when it comes to routing, it must be individual movement. You can't just take the whole stack and move them. I mean, you could. You're just going to pay the price. But by the rule, you're shown to be moving one unit at a time, barring any leader that's attached to that broken unit. All right, so now we have a broken unit here. And we are not forced to route because this unit is broken. It's not in good order. If we were to route, we would have to choose P6. On the other hand as well, I could choose Q5 because again, it only costs 2 move to go there. I would not be able to jump the wall, go right to Q6 because the wall would cost 3 movement points and it must be the shortest route possible. So if I chose Q5, it's a perfectly valid selection. This unit is not known, therefore I will not die for failure to route. I could even, again, if I'm in P5, say I move to Q5 and I have this concealed unit here, there isn't also an option for me to continue moving because if your next hex is a woods or building, you are allowed to enter that location. So, however, I now have a building and I'm going to move on to this unit. What would that do? That would strip his concealment, push me back, after which I would be eliminated because it would be a total of 6 move to get to this location, and therefore a failure to route, so I would be eliminated. However, since the German turn is next, and it is the German prep fire phase, then we have an option here for shooting without the concealment. Again, you must think long term because if you strip the concealment of this 447, that will now force this broken unit here to route. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to move. We're just going to go to P6, safest bet, and that's where we'll go. Also remember as well that should this unit be here in this location unconcealed, again, you cannot move any closer. Right now we have eyes on this machine gun up here. You have a unit back here, so you'd be forced to surrender. Again, unless no quarters in effect, in which case you would just be eliminated. So we have a broken German squad here in S5. Again, he does not have to move because he's in a house, and this unit is concealed, therefore it is not known. So he doesn't have to move. He cannot move in any case because he has broken units behind him, which you can now see. If this T4 side was actually in play, then of course he could move into that location or even U6. But the unit itself will have to stay where he is because the limitations of the area that's in play. If at any point this unit here decided to drop its concealment, then this unit would actually be forced to surrender to the 447 if this unit had dropped concealment. So that's a comprehensive route example that's in the rulebook. Again, we went through all the cases. Again, things to bear in mind is remember if no quarters in effect, some of these movements would not have occurred. Prisoners would have been less likely to be taken. They would be refused, rejected, and eliminated outright, or allowed to low crawl away. Typically, that's the answer. And that is routing in a nutshell. Like I said, this is as much for me as for you guys. I really have a problem with routing. I'm always choosing the wrong courses of action. And I'm hoping that some of this I've just covered will stick in my own brain. Hopefully you guys found it useful. If you did, again, please comments down below. I like the way the channel is growing. I'm hoping that I'm producing quality content for you guys all. If you made it this far, say you made it to the end. Really appreciate that. Some guys say that. Yeah, so next up, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to go back to Chapter S. I think there's some nuggets that I may have missed. Expanding on the enemy actions, fire commands, that kind of thing. We'll see how that goes. But we'll see you guys next video. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.